Buying my first house was supposed to be a milestone, a sign that I finally had my life together. After years of renting tiny apartments with weird neighbors and paper-thin walls, I was ready for something that was mine. No more landlords, no more security deposits. I was officially a homeowner. The house was exactly what I wanted, an older two-story place with a ton of character. Built in the 1920s, it had creaky wooden floors, vintage moldings, and the kind of charm you don't get in new builds. The neighborhood was quiet too, one of those tree-lined streets where everyone had a cute front porch and waved at each other. It felt safe. It felt like home. At first, everything was great. I spent the first few weeks painting, decorating, and getting settled. But then, the noises started. The first time I heard them, I was lying in bed around midnight, half asleep. It was subtle, just a faint scratching sound above me. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe just a branch brushing against the roof. But over the next few nights, it kept happening. Soft scratching, little scuffling noises, sometimes a faint thump from the attic. One night, I was watching TV in the living room when something darted across the floor. I barely caught a glimpse of it, but I knew exactly what it was, a rat. My stomach dropped. I grew up in the city. I knew what a rat infestation looked like. I called a pest control company the next morning, and the guy who came out confirmed my worst fear. I had a serious problem. There were signs of rat nests in the attic, droppings in the walls, and chewed up insulation. The exterminator set traps and said he'd come back in a few days to check on them. I tried not to let it freak me out, but knowing those things were crawling around above me while I slept made my skin crawl. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little sound. But after a few days, the traps did their job. I figured it was over. It wasn't. A week later, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard something behind me, a faint rustling coming from inside the pantry. My body went cold. I slowly turned, heart pounding, and opened the door. A rat, massive, was perched on one of the shelves, staring at me. I don't know who moved first, me or the rat, but within seconds, it was scrambling up the shelves, knocking over boxes and cans. I yelled and slammed the door shut, my entire body shaking. I called pest control again. This time, a different guy came out. He was older, been in the business for decades. He did a more thorough inspection, going through the attic, crawl spaces, even checking under the house. When he came back inside, he looked grim. "This isn't just a few rats," he said. "You've got a colony living in your house." I felt sick. Apparently, the problem was way worse than the first guy thought. The house was old, full of gaps and tiny entry points that made it easy for the rats to get in and stay. He told me the infestation had probably been there before I moved in. I just hadn't noticed yet. "The structure itself is compromised," he explained. "They've been chewing through the wood, the wiring. If you don't get this fixed fast, they're going to destroy this place from the inside out." I don't think I'd ever felt so defeated. I'd spent everything I had on this house, and now I was being told that unless I put thousands more into sealing up every crack, replacing half the insulation, and basically rebuilding parts of the structure, I'd never be able to get rid of them for good. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear them moving through the walls, skittering in the attic, claiming the house as their own. I couldn't do it anymore. A month later, I put the house back on the market. I was upfront about the infestation, but let's be real, nobody wants to buy a house filled with rats. I took a huge loss just to get rid of it. Now, whenever I look at houses, I don't care about the square footage or the backyard. The first thing I check, the attic, the crawl spaces, and the walls. Because once you've lived through a horror story like that, you never want to go through it again. I was 25 when I bought my first house, and I thought I had scored big. It was a sleek, modern townhouse in a newly developed neighborhood. Everything was brand new. Stainless steel appliances, polished wood floors, that fresh paint smell. After years of renting cramped apartments with thin walls and noisy neighbors, I was finally upgrading to real adult life. No more landlords. No more throwing money away on rent. This was my place. At first, everything felt perfect. Moving in was a breeze, and the first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet. No sirens, no street noise, no neighbors arguing, just silence. Then the weird stuff started. At first, it was small things. I'd come home to find a cabinet door slightly open when I knew I had closed it. My phone charger would be in a different spot. My bedroom door, which I always left ajar, would be shut when I woke up. I chalked it up to me being tired, distracted, maybe a little forgetful. I mean, moving into a new place is an adjustment, right? But then one night, I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. They were faint, but distinct. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hands shaking. I crept toward the bedroom door and swung it open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But the air felt heavy, like something had just been there. That was the night I decided to install security cameras. I set up one in the living room, another in the hallway facing my bedroom door. If someone or something was messing with me, I wanted proof. The next morning, I checked the footage. At first, everything looked normal. Then, around 3 a.m., the hallway camera picked up movement. My breath caught in my throat. The door to the guest bedroom, which I hadn't touched since moving in, slowly opened on its own. I felt ice creep through my veins. I had no pets, no roommates, and the windows were locked. There was no logical explanation. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But the feeling in the house changed after that. It wasn't just the occasional misplaced object or creaky noise. It felt like someone was watching me. One night, while scrolling Reddit, I got curious and decided to dig into the history of the area. The development was new, but what was there before? What I found made my stomach drop. The land my house was built on used to be the site of an old hospital. Not just any hospital, a psych ward that had been shut down decades ago after reports of neglect and abuse. Patients went missing. Staff quit without notice. There were rumors of unmarked graves. I slammed my laptop shut. Nope, nope, nope. The more I thought about it, the more everything clicked. The cold spots, the doors moving on their own, the feeling that I wasn't alone. I needed answers. The next day, I found a local historian who had researched the hospital. He confirmed everything I had read and added that some locals believed the land was still haunted by the spirits of the patients who were mistreated. People have reported strange occurrences in the area for years, he said. Things moving, voices at night, even figures in the windows of empty houses. That was it. I was done. I called a spiritual advisor because honestly, I didn't know what else to do. They came to the house and did a cleansing ritual. I felt stupid standing there while they burned sage and chanted, but for a while, it seemed to work. The house was quiet again, until it wasn't. A few weeks later, I woke up to something worse than footsteps, a whisper right next to my ear. I was out of that house by sunrise. I broke my lease, took the financial hit, and moved back into an apartment. The townhouse is still there. I drive past it sometimes, and I wonder if the new owners have noticed anything. Part of me wants to knock on the door and ask if they've heard the footsteps, if they've seen the doors move, but I don't. Some things I think are better left unknown. Buying my first house felt like a dream come true. After years of overpriced apartments and roommates who never cleaned up after themselves, I was finally moving into my own place. It was a cute little cottage on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by woods with a big backyard and a front porch that looked straight out of a movie. The house needed some work, but that was part of the charm. I figured I'd fix it up little by little, turn it into something truly mine. But what I didn't expect was that I wasn't moving in alone. At first, it was small things. A cabinet I didn't remember opening would be slightly ajar. My coffee mug, which I always set on the left side of the sink, would be on the right. I'd hear faint noises at night, shuffling, soft thuds, creaks that didn't quite match the old house sounds I had expected. I told myself I was just adjusting to living alone. I'd spent years surrounded by other people. Maybe my brain just wasn't used to the silence yet. But then I started noticing other things. Food would go missing. Not like, oh, I ate that and forgot. Number whole bags of chips, a container of leftovers, even a few beers from my fridge, gone. At first, I thought maybe I was being careless, but it kept happening. One night, I came home late from work and something felt off. The air inside the house was different, stale, like someone had been there too long. My skin prickled as I walked through the rooms, checking the windows and doors. Everything was locked. I told myself I was being paranoid, but just to be safe, I set up a cheap security camera in my living room, one of those motion-activated ones you can monitor from your phone. I figured I'd check the footage in a few days and confirm that I was just losing my mind. I wasn't. The first 2 nights, nothing happened, but on the third night, I woke up to a notification, motion detected in living room. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. And there it was, a blurry figure moving in the dark. At first, I thought it was a glitch, some weird shadow. But then they turned toward the camera. A man. Tall, thin, hair greasy and matted. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, and he moved slowly, almost methodically, like he knew the house. My stomach dropped. I watched as he crept toward the kitchen, reached into my fridge, and took a sandwich I had made that afternoon. He ate it standing there, right in the middle of my house, like he belonged. Then, just as calmly, he walked over to the hallway closet, opened the door, and stepped inside. I felt like I was going to throw up. I hadn't checked that closet in weeks. It was small, barely big enough for storage. There was no way someone was living in there. I wanted to run, to get in my car and never look back, but I had to be sure. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept toward the hallway. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I stood outside the closet for what felt like hours before finally taking a deep breath and yanking the door open. It was empty, completely empty. No sign of the man, no food wrappers, no bedding, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake in my locked bedroom, refreshing the camera feed over and over, waiting for him to come back. By morning, I knew I had to get out. I called the police, and they showed up an hour later. I told them everything, showed them the footage. They searched the house, the attic, even went under the crawl space. Nothing. Then, one of the officers called me outside. "We found something," he said, leading me around the back of the house. There, hidden behind the foundation, was a tiny, makeshift entrance to the crawl space. The opening was barely 2 feet wide, almost invisible from the outside. Inside, they found a pile of blankets, empty food containers, my missing beer cans. The man had been living under my house. They never caught him. The cops guessed he must have slipped away during the night, once he realized I was onto him. But the thought of it, of him moving around my house while I was sleeping, watching me, knowing my schedule, made my skin crawl. I sold the house 2 months later. Now, every time I move somewhere new, I check everything. The attic, the crawl space, the closets. Because once you've learned that someone can be living in your home without you knowing, you never feel truly alone again.